Hello everyone and welcome to Learning Mind. My name is Jyoti Nigam and I'm a software engineer. Today in this video I'll be telling you all about RESTful APIs. Before we move on to RESTful APIs, I want to give you an introduction to HTTP request. So whenever you request for a web page from your web browser, you are a client, you request for a web page to google.com, then that request goes to the server and the server finds that web page and returns you that web page as an HTTP response. The request that client or you or your web browser makes to the server that contains the web page is known as HTTP request. So I would like to introduce you to the format of HTTP request. Is how does this request happen? The HTTP request has six parts. The first is method, second protocol, third host, fourth URL, fifth body, and sixth headers. Now, what is HTTP method? The HTTP verb or method is basically the verb of the request. What does that mean? Is that what kind of request are you making? So, for example, you have a to-do app, okay, where you write all the work you need to perform in a day. Then, if you want to fetch all the data or all the to-dos which you have made, you'll use a get method. Get method basically retrieves the data from the server to the client. Now, if you want to update the data, so you have a to-do which has a list items by fruits. Now you want to update it to buy fruits and groceries. You want to make a change, so you will use put request. If you want to create a new to do, say you want to watch a movie, so you will make a post request to create a new to do. And if you want to delete an existing to do, say you have watched the movie and you need to strike off from the list, you'll use the delete method. These are the four methods. Please stay in this video. I'll be demonstrating you these methods in action. Further, let me cover the other parts of the HTTP request. So the other part is the protocol. So protocol is basically what flavor of HTTP you are using. For example, this says HTTP/1.1. What does this mean is that you're using 1.1 version of HTTP. URL is now the third part is host. Host is what web server you want to talk to. So in this case, this will be your host. This server will be your host. Now coming to URL. URL is what resource is being requested from the server. So for example, if you requested for Google's homepage, you type in www.google.com. This will be your URL. The fifth part is body. So body is extra data needed by the server. So for example, if you want to create a new to-do, you need to send the data that what will be the name of the to-do, and along with that to-do, the time at which you create it will be sent to the server. So these all will constitute the body. The body is what data server will need to create the new to-do. And coming to headers, so headers is the user agent or content type, all these fields. Headers is basically the metadata about your request. So in headers, you specify whether this content type is XML or JSON. So I'll just show you this in action and just stick for a while and we'll be starting with RESTful API. So for example, this is a to-do list app or a web page. So I'll open the console. Just press Control plus Shift plus I or click right click and inspect. Then afterwards move to the network tab and I'll start creating a new to do. I'll say by fruit and then I'll just do add task. So see there's something coming up. If you open this request, you'll find that the request method is post. The request URL is this what it has got, and you'll find some. These are the response headers. Also, just a quick mention: status codes tell you about the status of the request. 200 means the request is successful. Now, coming to the request headers. These are the request headers. So you find in here, these are the fields that go as the header part. So I'll show you. You will find the length of the content. You'll find content type, as I mentioned, find cookie. So these are the certain parts, or these are the metadata about the request. Now, if you come to payload, so payload is basically the body. Now I'll just show you. You'll find here what you mentioned in the to-do name as an argument. So see, the content by fruits which we mentioned is present over here. So this is a post request made, and this payload or body is the thing that is the extra data needed by the server. And you'll find some response over here. Response is what server sends, HTTP response. This is of the JSON format. JSON is a kind of a format, like we have XLink and other formats also, YML. And you find that uh, server has sent all these uh, key value pairs as the response. So this is how the request works. I'll show you get request also. So this one got post because we were sending some data to the server. Now, let me show you any get request which I find good. This is a get request. In get request, you will not find payload. So because in get request we don't send any data. Instead, the server sends us the HTTP response, the data that we need. This is the URL that is being requested, and this is a get request. Status code 200 implies that this request is successful. And you'll find these request header again, authorization, acceptance coding. These are the different parameters. You can deep dive into it and read more on the web. So you see, this is the response that server gave us. So this is all the data that server has returned back to us. So this was all about HTTP request. And now what is RESTful API? So RESTful APIs or REST stands for representational state transfer. So RESTful APIs are basically using these HTTP requests to communicate with web services. So when you use these HTTP requests, get, put, post, delete to communicate with the server, then it's RESTful APIs. So REST representational basically means that the data is represented in a specific format. So for example, we saw that the data is in JSON format. Coming to state basically means the current state of the data. For example, if you see, this is the state of the data currently returned by the server. If we make any changes, then what happens is the state of the data changes. For example, we change unit amount to 100 over here. Then server will send us that updated state of data. This is what we mean by state. And transfer is basically the transfer of data between client and server. Now there are certain like six guiding principles or constraints that make the RESTful API the REST API. That is what differentiates. So I'll come to the guiding constraints. So the six guiding constraints are uniform interface, client server architecture, stateless, cacheable, and layered system. I'll also attach this link in the description so that you can read. And I'll just give you a quick overview to all these six guiding principles so that you understand them well. What is client server? The client server is basically what we've been looking so far. So this is the client that makes an HTTP request to the server and server sends an HTTP response to the client. So this is the client server architecture. The client is basically the one who makes the request to retrieve or fetch something, and server is what sends the response to the client. So this is the client server architecture. REST APIs make use of client server architecture. Then I'll come to the next, that is statelessness. So statelessness basically means that request should be self-contained. Means no data, like server client should not assume that any of its data is stored in the server, and server does not have any data of the client. For server, all the clients are treated same or equally. So client needs to see over here. We saw that so many things are being sent in an HTTP request. So this is the complete request. Nothing else is required. And so the client sends the complete data for the server to acknowledge this request and send the response. This is what statelessness means. So you saw over here that it is representation state transfer. So don't get confused. State over here means that it refers to the state of the data. Whereas statelessness basically means that server does not contain any data stored, and the client should give the complete request. Nothing, it should not assume that server has some data stored or any previous information. The request should be self-contained for the server to respond back to the client. Coming to cacheable, so cacheable is basically a parameter which specifies that whether the data can be cached or not. So caching is basically that client can store the data which it has received for some amount of time, for some set amount of time, so that the response time is lessened. If you have a Google web page and if you again request for that web page, then client will use the cached data to load that page. If you're reading a blog, the best example would be a blog. So if you are reading a blog, and then what happens is whenever the next time you generate a request, it will open very fast. So what happens is that client uses caching. It stores that blog's web page and it returns that web page. After some set amount of time, it that web page blog storing would go away, and then it would again need to make request to the server. So this is what is meant by caching. So cacheable basically tells that whether the client can store the web page or not. Basically a kind of a Boolean parameter. Now coming to the layered system. So layered system is basically that the client should see only the immediate layer and not beyond that. So if you come over here, say for example, this client makes request to the server for the data, and the server does not have this data. it will request to another server. Maybe that data is stored at some another server. And this server sends response to this data and then this server sends to this client. This is the entire procedure happening like at the background. But for the client, it should appear that it has sent request to this server and only this server is responding back to this client. It it has no it should not be aware of what all these background stuff is happening, that whether this request server is sending to some other another web server, or maybe there are 4 5 servers involved in sending the response to the client. But for the client, it should appear that it is coming from the immediate server. Now, this was the layered system. Coming to code on demand, so code on demand is an optional functionality. What it means is that we can send code as a response. For example, server can also send a JavaScript code snippet as a response to the client, or any kind of script can be sent by the server. The last part is uniform interface. Uniform interface in the most simple terms means that the data is structured and it is predictable in nature. So it has these four constraints: identification of resources, manipulation of resources. So you can read all these constraints. In the most simplest terms, I would explain uniform interface as, say, if you open a website and, for example, you have this Todoist website, and you also have a Todoist app. So the functionalities or the representation should be the same. So if the data is sent in JSON format while we create a new Todoist to the server, in the app also it should happen the same way. So this is what uniform the interface. Basically, whatever the interface be it your Android or your Apple or your uh, web page, the things should behave the same way, and the the interface must uniquely identify that each resource, and the resources should be same irrespective of the platform. This was all about the RESTful APIs, what all was important, and the introduction to RESTful APIs. I hope you like this video. Also, do share, subscribe, and hit the bell icon, and comment below if you want to give any suggestions and do like this video. And stay tuned. In the next video, I'll be starting with Elasticsearch basics. And if you've not watched the previous video, then please do watch. That is introduction to the Elasticsearch. Thank you everyone. Goodbye.